So you're saying with Hilton Honors, I can use points for a free night stay anywhere?
Anywhere.
What about fancy places like the Canopy in Paris?
Yeah, Hilton Honors, baby.
Or relaxing sanctuaries like the Conrad in Tulum?
Hilton Honors, baby.
Ooh, what about the 5-star Waldorf Astoria in the Maldives?
Are you gonna do this for all 9,000 properties?
When you want points that can take you anywhere, anytime, it matters where you stay. Hilton, for the stay.
Study and play come together on a Windows 11 PC. And for a limited time, college students get the best of both worlds. Get the Unreal College Deal. Everything you need to study and play with select Windows 11 PCs. Eligible students get a year of Microsoft 365 Premium and a year of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with a custom color Xbox wireless controller. Learn more at windows.com/student offer. While supplies last. Ends June 30th. Terms at aka.ms/collegepc.
Today, I'm going to be exploring the fascinating human habit of setting our neighbor's house on fire just so we don't have to look at the massive leak in our own basement.
You're listening to Unbound, off script. No outlines, no safety nets, just Beth Curry talking about whatever the hell she wants, or whatever the hell you've asked her to uncover. It's unfiltered, it's unpredictable, and it's officially started. Pull up a chair and don't expect her to stop talking anytime soon. She's a total blabbermouth. Take it away, Beth.
Welcome back to Unbound. I'm Beth. This is an off-script episode that's also off-schedule. A special unscheduled Monday edition. Consider it an emergency intervention for your week before the week even gets a chance to ruin you. Okay? You're welcome and welcome. If you know me, any of my background, you know I studied human behavior during my educational foray into bleh. It was all in the mid-90s. I've been fascinated by it ever since. I'm a people watcher. I'm a listener. I'm always vibing on why us weirdos do what we do, and how we're manipulated to do it sometimes. And I'm going to start by talking about the architecture of avoidance, like looking at the ways that we create these elaborate smoke screens to kind of protect ourselves from our own lives. So there's a pretty darn impressive comfort in a screaming match, right? It's weird. Like if you've ever spent 45 minutes entirely losing your schmidt over the correct way to load a dishwasher, or if you've ever watched two grown-ass adults nearly come to blows in a corporate boardroom over the font size on a slide deck, then you've witnessed a masterpiece of human avoidance, okay? We do not actually give a shit at all about the forks or the direction that they're in the basket or whatever. We do not care about Helvetica versus Arial, okay? What we care about is the fact that looking at the actual issue requires a level of emotional nakedness that kind of makes us want to crawl into a hole and never come out, Psychologists call it displacement. You fancy psychologist types, thank you for that. I think it's the psychological equivalent of stubbing your toe on a coffee table and turning around to scream at the cat, right? Like the cat didn't move the table. The cat does not even understand the concept of furniture, but the cat's an available target and the coffee table is indifferent to your pain, right? So when we're terrified of a real issue, we look for a topic. Why? Because a topic is safe. A topic has rules and it has talking points, and most importantly, it can be debated indefinitely without ever requiring anybody to change their life in any possible way. So take a modern relationship, for example, okay? Classic fight about grocery shopping or whatever. You brought the wrong brand of peanut butter again. Well, it was on sale. We don't need to save 80 cents. We need consistency. So this is not a debate about peanut butter at all. This is a proxy war, right? The actual issue is that one person feels completely unseen and unsupported, and the other person feels constantly criticized and managed. But if they dare talk about feeling unseen, then they have to admit vulnerability, right? They have to risk rejection, and they have to face this terrifying possibility that maybe they are incompatible or that they need to do some heavy, painful emotional lifting, right? Buying the smooth instead of the crunchy is a much easier trial to prosecute, of course. You can bring evidence and you can point at the jar and you can win a peanut butter argument, but you cannot win a conversation about your deep-seated fear of abandonment, Okay. So we do this on a macro scale too. Like if you look at the public square, we pick sides on abstract, complex societal topics and we turn them into friggin' blood sports. Okay, we scream across digital voids about theories and ideologies. Why? Because if we look at the actual issues, our own loneliness or our lack of community, maybe our terror of an uncertain future, we might have to do something about it. It is so much easier to be a warrior for a topic than a caretaker of your own messy reality, right? So look at the macro scale of our world today. We are living in an era where polarization isn't just an accident, it's an industry, okay? It's a moneymaker. Big time. I've talked about this before in other episodes. Governments, political factions, celebrities, the media machine, algorithmic systems, they're all actively building careers and empires by creating ridiculous, calculated divisions between human beings. And we have reached a point of automated absurdity where some subsets of people are left screaming at each other over things they don't even understand. They don't know what they're screaming about. Seriously, they're screaming their faces off, holding signs that somebody else made for them. But when you ask them about anything about what they're yelling about, they either repeat some sort of talking point that has clearly been programmed into them, so they all sound like robots, or they just look at you and call you a name or label you something and say they don't have to talk to you and scream at you to go away because they can't answer, because they don't know what they're really yelling about. We are booing national anthems at sports arenas because we've been trained to view a piece of cloth as a weapon rather than a symbol. And we're logging onto social media and getting locked into toxic, multi-day shouting matches about structural racism and socioeconomic warfare underneath a completely innocent post about a cat wearing tiny slippers or something, right? If you step back and look at the behavior objectively, it looks like a collective psychiatric break. It really does. Clinically, though, it's just like this mass scale manifestation of the exact same displacement loop. Okay. A massive portion of our online reality is now just us being caught in automated feedback loops with digital ghosts. We're literally arguing with bots that are programmed by state actors and corporate interests to spew tailored propaganda. This is exactly what it is. This is not conspiracy, okay? The machine feeds us an endless stream of rage bait, and like lab rats hitting a lever, we devour it. Of course we do, because, we're weirdos. We get this immediate spike of cortisol, and our tribal instincts light up like a damn Christmas tree, and we jump into the comments section ready to fight to the death, right? So why do we fall for it so easily? Well, kids, let me tell you, modern life is terrifyingly complex, and it's lonely and it's uncertain. Okay, facing the reality of economic instability, maybe the breakdown of genuine local communities, or this quiet fear that the world is changing faster than we can adapt, it requires a really immense amount of deep and uncomfortable reflection. Okay, it requires us to sit with a sense of helplessness. And that's kind of scary, right? So this machine, the machine, offers us an escape hatch. It translates our deep, ambient anxiety into this highly specific decorative war. And it gives us a target. And it's infinitely easier to scream at a bot who we think is a human, but isn't, about a culture war topic or something, than it is to look at the screen and turn it off and admit that we are profoundly disconnected from the people living right across the street. So this outrage machine keeps our eyes fixed firmly on the horizon, right? Fighting ghosts, so we never notice the ground crumbling right beneath our own feet. Make sense? The problem with decorative arguments is that they're exhausting. They burn an immense amount of psychological calories while leaving the core rot completely untouched. Like, you lie in bed at night, your heart's pounding, your adrenaline is spiked, you're staring at the ceiling, you're thinking about how you really nailed them on that third point about the grocery receipt. Meanwhile, the distance between you and the person sleeping next to you has grown by another mile. So we are addicted as humans. We are addicted to the conflict because the conflict, it feels like action to us. It feels like we're doing something. If I'm shouting, I'm engaged. And if I'm angry, I'm passionate. But it's fake engagement. It's just a smokescreen that we throw up to blind ourselves, because the moment the smoke clears, we're still left standing in a room with the one person we're trying the hardest to escape, right? Consider the dynamic of the expert debate we see online every day. People spend hours researching statistics and gathering links and building ironclad arguments to defeat a stranger on an internet over a cultural topic that has absolutely zero impact on their actual day-to-day life. And that stranger becomes the repository for all their unexpressed anxiety. If they can just convince this random username that they're wrong, then they get a fleeting artificial sense of control over a world that feels increasingly chaotic, right? It's a massive expenditure of intellectual and emotional energy designed for one specific person or purpose, and that's to keep the gaze directed outward, right? Because the moment you stop typing, the moment the screen goes black, you're forced to sit in the quiet room with your own choices. And you're forced to look at the relationship that's falling apart, or the career that has stalled, and maybe the profound sense of emptiness that you refuse to acknowledge. The topic is actually your shield, right? It's the shiny object you wave in front of your own eyes so that you don't have to look at the cliff you're walking toward. We see this play out during, in families during the holidays and stuff. The family gathering becomes a minefield of topics. We fight about politics. We fight about traditions. We fight about who hosted last year and who brought the wrong side dish, right? Everyone leaves the dinner table exhausted and angry and convinced that the other side is morally bankrupt or intellectually deficient, if I can put it kindly. But if you strip away the topics, what is actually happening? This is a group of people who share a history, but no longer know how to connect, right? It's an assembly of wounded inner children who are terrified of being rejected by the very people who are supposed to love them unconditionally. Shouting about a political candidate is the only way they know how to say, please see me, please validate my existence. And I think it's a tragic misdirection of human desire. There's just this beautifully orchestrated tragedy where everyone is speaking a different language and wondering why nobody understands them. If you can't find a safe topic to fight about, your next best option, of course, is to find a person to ruin. Okay? Humans are tribal creatures, and nothing unites a fractured psyche quite like the common enemy. Enter the scapegoat. So historically, the scapegoat was an actual goat. The ancient rituals involved symbolically placing the sins of the community onto the animal and chasing it into the wilderness. Okay? It was a fantastic system. The town got clean, the goat got a walk, and nobody had to actually stop stealing their neighbor's chickens, right? So we've modernized this practice, but we keep the core philosophy. Okay? We are perpetually on the hunt for something or someone to carry our baggage into the woods. The most convenient scapegoat is circumstance. The market is just bad right now. The algorithm changed. Mercury is in retrograde. It is raining. We treat the universe as if it has a personal vendetta against our specific bank account or happiness. Circumstance is a brilliant scapegoat because it can't talk back, right? You can blame the economy for your failing business for 5 years without ever having to admit that your product is mediocre and your customer service is probably hostile. The economy will never show up at your house with a lawyer to defend its reputation, right? But if circumstance feels too abstract, we look for a human face, and this is where human behavior gets truly dark and bizarre. We routinely choose scapegoats who hold absolutely none of this responsibility. So think about the middle manager who gets screamed at by the executive because the quarterly projections are down. The manager then goes down to the floor and fires the intern who started on Monday. And the intern didn't cause the deficit. The intern barely knows where the bathrooms are, but the intern is vulnerable and anger requires an outlet. We see this in families too. There's one person designated as the cause of all the friction. If they would just sober up or get a job or stop being so dramatic or start eating gluten again, then everything would be perfect. The family as a whole constructs this narrative where this single individual is the dam holding back a river of domestic bliss. But what happens when that scapegoat leaves? What happens when the problematic sibling moves across the country or the terrible employee gets fired? Usually a brief moment of panic occurs. The system realizes that the misery is still there. The tension hasn't left the house. And because the group can't face the truth, that they're all contributing to a toxic dynamic, they immediately begin casting for a new replacement, and within 3 months, a new scapegoat is crowned. Why do we do this? Because accountability is terrifying. True accountability means admitting that the call is coming from inside the house, right? It means acknowledging that you are the author of your own misery, or at least a very active co-writer. But blaming a scapegoat gives you this temporary hit of dopamine and a massive dose of self-righteousness. It allows you to remain the tragic victim in your own movie. You get to say, look at what they did to me, which is much more comfortable of a line to deliver than, look at what I'm doing to myself. This behavior relies heavily on a psychological phenomenon called the fundamental attribution error. And when we look at our own failures, we blame our environment. I was late because the traffic was terrible. But when we look at someone else's failure, we blame their character. They were late because they're lazy and disorganized. When we apply this to the concept of the scapegoat, we kind of create a bulletproof narrative, right? We become the blameless victims of external forces, while the person we've chosen to blame becomes the embodiment of pure malicious intent. We convince ourselves that their existence is the sole barrier to our peace of mind. It's an incredibly seductive lie because it completely absolves us of the need to do any internal inventory. We don't have to look at our own passivity, our own enabling behaviors that maybe we partake in, or even our own complicity in the situation. We just have to point and condemn. And we also see this play out on a more intimate social scale through gossip, right? Gossip, I get so angry when I think about gossip and talk about gossip. Because gossip really affected my life just in the last 10 years or so, 15 years. Gossip's the low rent version of the scapegoat mechanism, okay? It is what happens when people lack the emotional maturity to handle their own stagnation. So they gather in these small toxic circles to dissect the lives of others. I think there's a pathetic, time-warped quality to chronic gossip, too. You will often see people who, out of sheer terror of looking at their own unmet potential, retreat directly back into the exact same mean girl dynamics they relied on 10 or 15 years ago, right? They resurrect old toxic social structures and they surround themselves with a court of equally insecure people they maybe even at one point moved away from for a period. They go back to them, and then they spend their energy manufacturing narratives about anyone who had the audacity to grow up and move on. Now, from a behavioral standpoint, it is pure regression. When a person realizes that they're stuck under their own rain cloud, watching someone else walk out into the sunlight is deeply triggering. And instead of doing the hard work to fix their own life, it's much easier to gather a group of miserable compliance officers and sit in a room and try to tear that person down behind their back, right? It gives them a fleeting artificial sense of superiority. For an hour or two, they get to feel like they are the arbiters of cool, just like they did in high school. But when the meeting adjourns and the wine glasses are empty, the illusion fades. The mean girl is still trapped in the past, surrounded by the same hollow relationships, desperately running from the reality of her own choices. It's a sad cyclical tragedy, in my opinion, but the moment you recognize it for what it is, a desperate coping mechanism for a deeply insecure psyche, it completely loses its power over you. The true tragedy of the scapegoat mechanism is that it destroys the innocent, right? It selects the person who is least capable of defending themselves, the one who's already carrying their own heavy burden, and it loads them down with this collective garbage coming from everyone else. It's a cowardly act of emotional dumping. And the worst part is we do it with a sense of moral superiority, right? We convince ourselves that we are doing the right thing and that we're purifying the environment by removing the contaminant. But the contaminant isn't the person. It's our own fear. It's our own refusal to face the pain of our reality. So until we realize the scapegoat is just a mirror reflecting our own unhealed wounds, we will keep running people into the wilderness, wondering why the desert keeps getting bigger. Now, I want to go back to that cloud I just mentioned. You know the one. It's that heavy gray, localized weather pattern that seems to follow you from room to room and job to job and relationship to relationship. We tend to speak about hopelessness and low energy as if they're external viruses that we caught at a bus station. I just woke up this way, we say. I'm just stuck under this cloud. But if you look closely at the psychology of chronic stagnation, you notice something kind of unsettling. We don't just stand under the cloud, okay? We build a small, comfortable patio under it. We put out some lawn chairs. We install a damn fire pit, and we get comfortable. So there's something called secondary gain, and it means that we get secret benefits from our negative behaviors or states of mind. What do you gain from being hopeless? You gain immunity from failure, right? If you decide that your life is fundamentally broken, that you are doomed to be tired and that nothing will ever work out for you, you never have to try again, you don't have to take risks, you don't ever have to put your ego on the line, you don't have to face the terrifying prospect of giving something your absolute all and still coming up short. Hopelessness is an incredibly effective suit of armor, right? It protects you from the disappointment of life, the crushing disappointment of life, by ensuring that you never experience anything good enough to lose, right? If you want something, if there's a project, a career, a creative pursuit, a state of health that you can't stop thinking about, it belongs at the absolute top of your priority list, okay? Not on page 2, not in the when things quiet down section, at the top. The belief that you will magically find the energy to change your life after the cloud clears is an absolute delusion, and you're living in it. Admit it. The energy does not come before the movement. The energy comes from the movement. So when you stand under the same cloud day after day, refusing to take a single step in any direction, you are not just waiting, you are actively declining. Okay? The human brain is highly adaptive. If you train it to exist in a state of low-grade misery all the livelong day and you're constantly excuse-making, it becomes exceptionally good at it. Your world shrinks. Your tolerance for discomfort drops to 0. Your capacity for joy atrophies, basically. The most terrifying part of this cycle is that it can become a permanent residence. Absolutely. As a human being, you can actually become trapped forever. You see these people every day, okay? They're 60 years old. No disrespect to 60-year-olds at all. It's just an example, okay? Sitting in a diner complaining about the exact same town, the exact same people, the exact same missed opportunities they were complaining about at 25. They didn't get hit by a sudden catastrophe. They just never moved their damn feet. They stayed under the cloud until their legs forgot how to walk, and then they blamed the weather. This state of permanent stagnation is often reinforced by learned helplessness, okay? This is a behavioral pattern where an organism, after enduring repeated, painful, or uncomfortable stimuli, learns to believe that it has no control over its environment. It simply stops trying to escape, even when the path to freedom is wide open, okay? We do this to ourselves through a slow, steady drip of negative self-talk. We tell ourselves that the system is rigged and that our genetics are flawed and maybe that we don't have the right connections or that we're just naturally unlucky. I hear that one a lot. Every time we repeat these assertions, we hammer another nail into the coffin of our own agency, right? We convince our subconscious that effort is futile, and our brains, being efficiency machines, they respond by turning off the generator. It cuts the supply of dopamine and it lowers the adrenaline, and it leaves us sitting in the dark, basically, completely drained of the vitality required to change our circumstances, right? What we fail to realize is that the cloud isn't stationary, it's expanding. So the longer you sit beneath it, the more it consumes the surrounding landscape. What started as a bad mood becomes a bad week, which turns into a difficult year, which solidifies into a permanent personality trait. You become the person who is defined by their limitations rather than their potential. And you become a monument to what could have been, a ghost haunting your own life. I think the most insidious part of the transformation is that it feels completely logical while it's happening. You feel like you're just being realistic. You think you're protecting yourself from the pain of disappointment, when in reality, you're executing a slow motion suicide of the spirit. You're choosing the certainty of misery over the uncertainty of growth. And, that's a a trade that will bankrupt your soul every single time. And people often confuse actual clinical depression with this, and it's not the same thing. And a lot of doctors will even just immediately pull out a prescription pad, and that just makes the situation worse, especially for people who aren't clinically depressed and don't need a pharmaceutical, because then they become numb and then they can't move at all, even if they wanted to, in most cases. I also kind of want to have a serious conversation about the words that come out of our mouths when we're scared too, okay? So an excuse is not a rational explanation of reality. An excuse is a sophisticated intellectual defense mechanism designed to protect us from our own desires, okay? So let's lay down a brutal, unvarnished truth here. If you are making excuses for why you cannot do something, it means you do not want it, okay? That's it. I know that hurts to hear. I've probably pissed you off. You probably want to argue with me. You probably want to tell me about your schedule and your kids and your mortgage and your thyroid and your lack of capital or your bad back. And yes, reality exists. Absolutely. I live it too. Constraints exist. Yes. Some people are playing the game of life on a much harder difficulty setting than others, of course. But there's a vast difference between a constraint and an excuse, okay? A constraint is a wall. It's a wall you have to figure out how to climb, tunnel under, or smash through, okay? An excuse is a wall you sit down next to, open a book, and declare that the wall is unclimbable, so there's no point in trying. When we say, I want to write a book, but I just don't have the time, what we're actually saying is I prefer the comfort of scrolling on my phone for 2 hours every evening over the agonizing vulnerability of staring at a blank page and realizing I might not be a genius. When we say, I want to leave this toxic relationship, but it's too complicated with our mutual friends, what we are actually saying is, I'm more terrified of being alone on a Tuesday night than I am disgusted by being disrespected every damn day. So excuses are the lies we tell ourselves so we could sleep at night without feeling like cowards. They allow us to maintain a high opinion of our potential while completely avoiding the work required to realize it. It lets us say, oh, I could have been a contender if only things had been different. Now, to get change, you have to make change. That sounds like a greeting card or some lame Pinterest quote from 2007, but the physics of it are absolute. You cannot introduce the exact same inputs into your daily routine and expect a different output. You just can't. If your day looks exactly the same today as it did 3 years ago, your life will look exactly the same 3 years from now. If you're bothered by something, if you're miserable in your job, your body, or your mind, you have to get over the psychological hump of your own resistance. The resistance is always going to be there. It doesn't go away because you waited a week. It doesn't go away because it's Monday. The moment you accept that your excuses are just these fancy admissions that you prefer your current comfort over your future growth, everything changes, okay? The illusion shatters. You no longer get to play the victim. You're forced to look at yourself in the mirror and admit the truth. I am choosing this. I am choosing to stay right here. Now, if you consider the linguistic construction of an excuse, so it almost always begins with this declaration of intent followed by a massive modifier, the but, right? I really want to start that business, but that little word is this anchor of your complacency. It's structure, okay? Everything that follows is an attempt to negotiate with reality. This is why I say when people apologize, I don't ever want to hear a but after the I'm sorry. And I don't like it in this case either, because everything that comes after that but is irrelevant. It's a lie. It's just, I don't want to hear it. So the but is a plea for exemption from the laws of cause and effect, right? You want the reward without the risk. You want the harvest without the planting, and you want the muscle without the strain. But the universe doesn't negotiate, right? It doesn't give a shit about your stories or your justifications. It only responds to action. So when you look at people who've actually accomplished the things you claim to want, you will rarely find individuals who lacked constraints. What you will find are people who refuse to let those constraints become their identity. They didn't have more time than you. They just managed the time they had with a cold, almost ruthless efficiency, right? They didn't have more money. They just risked the money they had because staying where they were was more painful than losing everything. right? They didn't have less fear. They just walked through the fear because they realized that the alternative was a lifetime of quiet desperation. The excuse is the anesthetic that we inject into our own veins to dull the pain of our untapped potential, right? It allows us to decay peacefully without the annoying interruption of our conscience asking us why we gave up on ourselves. Now, I'm going to preach a little here, but I do it from a place of experience, okay? Some examples. I lived from childhood to well into my 30s, gravely obese, okay? I was comfortable in it, but also not. I had to change. Nobody was doing it for me. I did the work. I made the changes. I once was in a toxic friendship. I needed out. I had to be the one who walked and never looked back. I had to be the one who barely ever thought of the entire experience and what it took from me and how it hurt me. Only I was going to make that change. Nobody was going to do it for me. And I did it. I write books. I put the work in and I did it. I told my very painful story. I admitted to my past wrongdoings. I apologized to people. I put the ego aside and apologized. And I meant it. I started a podcast. I research. I interview. I talk to people. As an introvert who generally is not operating on the same lower vibrational frequency most of society operates on, this is incredibly hard. It's draining. But if I want to make change, I have to do it. So here comes the preaching. Please listen. Give me a chance here. If we want to transition from the state of decorative warfare and perpetual excuse-making into a life of genuine agency, we have to understand what a breakthrough actually looks like, okay? It's rarely a lightning bolt from heaven. It's rarely a sudden burst of inspiration that carries us effortlessly up the mountain. A breakthrough is usually a very messy, uncomfortable, and damn undignified collapse of our old defense mechanisms. Okay? It's the moment when the weight of your own bullshit becomes too heavy to carry. It's that moment when you look at the mountain of excuses you've built over the last decade and realize that it isn't a fortress protecting you, it's a prison burying you alive. Okay? In psychological terms, this requires a massive shift in what we call your locus of control. I've discussed this before. People who are trapped under the rain cloud operate from an external locus of control, okay? They believe that their life is dictated by fate, maybe by their boss, by their spouse, by traffic, the economy, their upbringing, whatever. They're just these leaves blowing in the wind, entirely dependent on the direction of the gale. But to break the system, you have to cultivate an internal locus of control. You have to adopt the radical, almost terrifying belief that you and you alone are the primary driver of your life. You have to accept that while you cannot control the cards you're dealt, you are entirely responsible for how you play the hand. And the shift is painful. It is, because it strips away your innocence, right? You can no longer claim to be a bystander in your own tragedy. If you're lonely, you have to admit you've built walls instead of bridges. And if you're stuck in a dead-end job, you have to acknowledge that you haven't updated your resume or taken a class in 5 years, right? If your health is declining, you have to look at the daily choices you are making at the dinner table and on the couch. But within that terror lies only the real freedom you will ever possess, okay? Because if you are the one who created the mess, you're also the one who can clean it up. If your choices put you under the cloud, your choices can move you out from under it. And this process requires a level of radical self-honesty that most people will never have the stomach for. It means stopping yourself mid-sentence when you start to blame someone else. It means catching the excuse before it leaves your mouth and replacing it with a statement of fact. Instead of saying, I can't go to the gym because I have too much email, you say, I'm choosing to prioritize my inbox over my health today. Instead of saying, I can't talk to my partner because they're too defensive, you say, I'm avoiding an uncomfortable conversation because I'm afraid of what might happen. The language shift sounds minor, but it's revolutionary. I talked a lot about language shift in season 2 because it was that shift in language and that shift in attitude that changed my life and my lifestyle and my ability to no longer use food as armor and no longer fall into my actual diagnosed eating disorders, my food addiction and my binge eating disorder. Like, the language makes a difference because it moves you from the passenger seat to the steering wheel, right? It restores your power. It reminds you that every single moment of your life is a choice and that the quality of your life is simply the sum total of those choices. So you're probably wondering, how do we stop the machine? How do we dismantle this elaborate apparatus of topics and scapegoats and clouds and excuses? So it starts with radical, borderline uncomfortable observation. You have to start treating your own mind like a suspicious character in a crime thriller. Okay? That's it. You have to question its motives constantly. The next time you find yourself getting incredibly angry about something small, sit with that anger. Okay? Don't push it away. Don't numb it with alcohol or drugs or whatever. Sit with it. Be uncomfortable, okay? Ask yourself, what am I avoiding right now? If this fight about the laundry room was completely resolved, what terrifying truth would I be left facing, okay? When you feel the overwhelming urge to point a finger at someone, your partner, your boss, the government, universe, drop your hand and look at your own damn palm. Ask yourself, what is my percentage of responsibility here? Even if it's only 10%, what am I doing with that 10%? And most importantly, you want to look at where your feet are planted. If you're cold, move away from the window. If you're under a cloud, take 3 steps to the left, okay? The transition from a life of avoidance to a life of action is not a grand cinematic moment at all. There's no violins playing, although that would be funny. There's no montage. It's usually very quiet and very boring and very difficult. And it's often a quiet and boring and difficult choice that you made on just a regular morning, in your life, whatever. It's choosing to open the laptop instead of the fridge. It's choosing to say, I'm sorry, I was taking my frustration out on you because I'm stressed about work, instead of keeping the argument going. It's choosing to admit that you're scared rather than pretending you're just too busy. The cloud will not move on its own. It doesn't have a brain. It's your cloud. You blew the air that created it, and you're the only one who can walk away from it, okay? Stop looking for a goat to carry your choices into the woods. The woods are full enough as it is. Take your stuff back, look at it, start moving. Okay? We have to understand that the discomfort of change is temporary, but the discomfort of regret is permanent. The pain of discipline lasts for an hour or a day. The pain of looking back at a life of unfulfilled potential lasts forever. We treat our excuses like shields protecting us from suffering, right? But they're actually magnets drawing more suffering into our lives. They make sure that we stay exactly where we are, accumulating more nonsense, more bitterness, more resentment, and more despair with every passing year. So next time you hear yourself saying that you can't do something, I want you to pause, strip away the modifiers. I want you to look at the raw core of the statement and see it for what it is. It's a choice. If you choose not to act, that's fine, but then own the choice. Say, I'm choosing to stay here. Because there's a strange kind of dignity in that honesty. Trust me, there is, okay? It is far better to be an intentional coward than a delusional victim. But if you want something else, if you want that vision that keeps you up at night, if you want that version of yourself that's strong and engaged and alive, then you have to take the first step. It doesn't have to be a big step. It just has to be a step that changes your position relative to the cloud. Write a paragraph, walk for 10 minutes, have an awkward conversation, do the thing that makes your heart race, because the racing heart it pushes you. It pushes its power, okay? That's all. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to reach out or help me support the production costs, since I like to keep the show free, all the info's in the show notes. And until next week, try to keep your feet moving and don't fight about the peanut butter.
And that brings us to the end of another episode of Unbound Off Script. Someone eventually had to pull the plug because, as you know, Beth will happily keep talking until the sun goes down. Thanks for listening, and we will see you whenever she finally runs out of things to say. I'm Rob, she's a blabbermouth, and we're out.